Well, it's holiday weekend, of course Easter weekend, which means there's a positive plethora of grand old movies on the box. Which to choose between them on Freeview? Well, I know one man with the answer. He's got three, I've got three, and it's his pick of the week coming up now. It's Van Connor, top movie critic, of course, and the man behind the off-screen podcast, dropping later on today. Good morning, Van. Loads of great movies on option, so what have you gone for first?
Well, I can't resist any chance to talk about Judge Dredd. Thankfully not, as you have previously mentioned, the god-awful 1995 Sylvester Stallone, Danny Cannon directed one. No, I'm going for the good one. This is Pete Travis's 2012, simply titled Dredd Effort, starring Carl Urban, Olivia Thirlby, and Game of Thrones alum Lena Headey. And I love this movie. You've not seen this one, have you, Paul?
I've not seen it yet. No, I've kind of swerved it because the other one brought back such terrible memories for me. Although I like Max von Sydow in the original one, it was just such a mishmash of nonsense. And it was the travesty of what the 2000 AD comic was about, because that was a kind of game changer in comic book terms. The film was just a disappointment, the first one.
Well, if you're a fan of the 2000 AD comics, you're in good stead here. So what they've done with this one, this is, say, from 2012, the idea here is you're not getting a Dredd origin story. This is not about Dredd's life. This is just Dredd solving a case. It's something I have personally been so on board for with comic book characters across the board. Not everything needs to be life and death for the hero themselves. Sometimes they can just solve a case. Batman can go and solve a crime.
And we know the
Superman,
origin. Every time they reboot these things, we don't need to know that Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider. We don't need to know that Bruce Wayne's poor mum and dad got shot by a bloke who may or may not be the Joker. Just hit the ground running for once.
Exactly. Sometimes we can just have them go and do a day at work because that's entertaining. That's why we're reading them as characters, and that's why they're so enduring. And in the case of Dredd, this is Dredd breaking in a new trainee, giving them their assessment day. This is Judge Anderton, who you may remember from the comics. She was the psychic judge. This is, of course, set in the Judge Dredd universe, in which, it's a dystopian future. The legal system as we know it has long since gone, and we now have, in place of both police and the legal system, we have the judges, basically authoritarian police officers who both arrest you and sentence you on the spot. Played here by Carl Urban, Judge Dredd is sent into one of the tower blocks, which is a hotbed of a new criminal drug known as slow-mo, which is wonderfully realised here. Just incredible slow-motion footage, all shot in like high res. I think something like 400 frames a second or something like that. Looks incredible. Was released in 3D in cinemas, and this came out around the same time as The Raid. So Dredd has to get from the ground floor up to the top of the tower to take out, the drug lord Kingpin, here played by Lena Headey as Mormor, I think she's called. And she, rather like the plot of The Raid, which unfortunately was released the same year as this, simply pops over the tannoy and says to all of the criminals living in the building, anyone who kills this guy gets to live here for free. But Dredd, of course, has other intentions, as you'll hear in the wonderful clip, which, of course, has the iconic line in it, because you can see this tonight on Film 4 at 11:15. It is about 90 minutes long. It is an absolute banger. It is, of the two, it is far and away the best interpretation of Dredd for the screen. Urban is absolutely fantastic, and no, he does not take the helmet off in this one. It's a banger.
Here we go then, it's on tonight. It's Dredd. Here's a clip.
Inhabitants of peach trees, this is Judge Dredd. Mama is not the law. I am the law. Mama is a common criminal, guilty of murder, guilty of the manufacture and distribution of the narcotic known as slow-mo, and as of now, under sentence of death. Any who obstruct me in carrying out my duty will be treated as an accessory to her crimes. You have been warned. And as for you, Mama, judgment time.
Great stuff there. Okay, so that's a big recommendation. But I'm competing with an absolute comedy classic. It was released a good while ago now. It was a bit of a slow burn at first, back in 2004, but it's actually become almost iconic as comedy go. It's called Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. It's on tonight, 11:05, Channel 4, starring Will Ferrell, of course. Steve Carell's in it, or Carell, however you pronounce his name. And it is just a classic film takes you back to the 1970s when men were men and wore aftershave called things like panther sweat, and would take their tops off in the office and flex their guns in front of new female newsreaders to try and intimidate them. It's funny, it's surreal. It's got Jack Black in it, I think almost uncredited, as the man who kicks Ron Burgundy's dog off a bridge. Yep. And you've also got a moment of jazz flute excellence from Will Ferrell, which has never been seen before on the big screen. So I think I don't know anybody who doesn't love this film, because it's just so out there and stupid, and it's like it reminds me a bit of the kind of films that maybe, just maybe, had he managed to survive, possibly John Belushi might have made. There's a kind of sense of it, you being in on an in-joke, but everybody can share, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and a hell of a cast in this one that includes, for instance, Paul Rudd, Steve Carell, as you say, as well. Christina Applegate, I really love, as well as Veronica Corningstone, and just across the board, absolutely hilarious. Funny thing about this one, if you bought it from the US in 2004 on DVD, which I actually did, you could get an entire second movie that was entirely built out of deleted scenes. It was called Anchorman: The Legend Continues.
Wow.
And it was like a series of weird subplots that had just been locked out of the movie. So there is an entire Anchorman movie out in the world that no one seems to have seen.
It's going to be my holy grail. If I can't borrow it from you, I'm going to buy a copy myself. You get outtakes at the end of this one when you get the video, the normal DVD or video anyway, but there's some great, and the ad-libs, you can tell, is just fantastic. The insults between the two of them. Here we go then. It's on 11 tonight. Even if you've seen it, you're going to want to see this again. So set record for it. Channel 4, Anchorman, Legend of Ron Burgundy. Here's the trailer.
Good evening, I'm Ron Burgundy. Here's what's going on in your world tonight.
It was the 1970s.
Looking good, San Diego.
In a simpler time.
Hey, Garth, how's the divorce? Oh, not so good. I'll probably never see my kids. Fantastic.
It took a simpler man.
Follow leads, confirm sources. Real journalism, my friend. Great. Right on. Now, what's a lead?
To deliver the news.
I have some very urgent and important breaking news. Cannonball!
Will Ferrell is Ron Burgundy.
Who's that handsome devil?
A Californian so popular.
You stay classy, San Diego.
Yeah!
He could have been governor.
Hey, I like that fanny.
Oh, Mr. Burgundy.
Anchorman, the legend of Ron Burgundy.
Burgundy did it! Hi-yo! Oh! Ron Burgundy is down and it is bad!
Down but not out, of course, a fantastic film that's on tonight, 11, Channel 4. What's your second recommendation? But I said there were some classics around. You've gone for a biggie this time.
I have indeed. So this is one near and dear to me from my childhood. Following the success of Batman in 1989, becoming this great cross-promotional multimedia toy-selling juggernaut, the race was, of course, on to try and cash in on that. And the Hollywood studio system being what it is, they decided, why not try something that they don't have to pay anything for the rights for? So, of course, it's 1991's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, starring Kevin Costner as the most bizarrely accented Robin Hood since, I think, Sean Connery 15 years previous in Robin and Marion with, who was that?
Audrey Hepburn, I think.
Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn, that was it, yes. Audrey Hepburn. This borrows, of course, from the 80s TV series Robin of Sherwood as well, and basically reimagines a more action-centric version of Robin Hood, with Costner in the lead, Morgan Freeman by his side, and none other than the late, great Alan Rickman as the Sheriff of Nottingham. And the thing I didn't know until recently is that Alan Rickman hired his friends, he hired Ruby Wax and Peter Barnes to punch up the script because he thought it was terrible. And I have to believe that is why every line that he has in this movie is absolute gold. Cancel Christmas, take his heart out with a spoon, it doesn't get
and also,
any better than
no
this.
more scraps for the lepers. It's a quite surreal. Yeah. I know you said that. I can hear Ruby Wax in particular saying some of those lines.
So good in there.
Oh, it's a brilliant bit of trivia about it. And it made an absolute fortune at the box office. And of course, it inflicted the Bryan Adams, Everything I Do for You honours for, 16 weeks at number one or something ridiculous?
You know what? It's still one of the definitive movie theme songs, and I'm one of those people. I mourn the loss of the movie theme song in our current age of cinema. I think every Avengers movie would be better if it had like Beyonce singing a cover of "Holding Out for a Hero" or something like that as a single over the top of it. But you can see this absolutely brilliant. I mean, it wasn't well regarded in its time, but it's become such a staple of so many childhoods. It's gotten sort of revisionist opinions over the years. People have gone back, seen it with new eyes, and you can see it for yourself. Perfect time, Saturday afternoon, BBC One. 5:35. I think it's an all-timer. I'm going to pass you over to none other than Kevin Costner and Christian Slater. Remember when Christian Slater was in movies? Well, you can revisit that, say, Saturday afternoon, 5:35 on BBC One. I'll pass you over to Robin of Locksley.
And also, if you pay close attention, you'll see one of the final movie appearances of the Artful Dodger himself, Jack Wilde. But it's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. What a cracker.
I heard today that the sheriff now values your neck at 500 gold pieces. I say we take him in.
Will, do you think that the sheriff will give everything back after I'm gone?
Well, give us the reward and our pardons.
Wrong. We'll stretch your necks one by one.
What would you have us do? Fight armored men on horseback with rocks in our bare hands?
Needs be. But with the one true weapon that escapes you, Will. Courage.
Courage. It's a great speech. And I think you're right. At the time, it was slightly sneered at, but it's got a very good, old-fashioned and a good sense feel about it, that film. It's a nice ensemble film as well, I think.
It also sold a bizarre number of action figures. Like, you wouldn't think of Robin Hood as something they could sell action figures off, but every kid I knew in 1991 had those action figures. And a good friend of mine forgot the title of the film recently. He said, "What's that movie with Kevin Costner and the guys in the trees?" I went, do you mean Robin Hood? Yeah, he meant Robin Hood.
He wasn't thinking of Men in Tights, though, was he? The Mel Brooks spoof of it. I'm sure he wasn't. Okay, the
Mel Brooks one, though, is a banger.
My next recommendation is a bank holiday weekend classic. It's one of my favourite westerns of all time. It's romantic, it's soppy, it's silly. It's also very moving. At times, very violent indeed. It's 22:03 on the Saturday afternoon, tomorrow afternoon. BBC Two from 1969, directed by George Roy Hill, from a script by William Goldman. It's called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You don't need me to tell you. There's Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and sadly no relation, Catherine Ross in it. And it's a wonderful film about the death of the West. It's a kind of film it's a companion piece of The Wild Bunch, because Butch Cassidy, his gang was called The Wild Bunch. And the same year, Peckinpah released his masterpiece. There's no link between the two films, except that they both chose to look at the end of the West at the end of the 1960s. And it is romantic. This has got a great theme song. It won the Oscar for the best original theme song, which is Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Just a marvellous film. And the ending is still kind of... Even if you know what's coming, it's difficult to hold back a tear when you think what fate might befall them in Bolivia. Also and again, this film I think has got ad-libs in it. I think some of the stuff between Newman and Redford must have been either worked out on the set, or they were trying to do a kind of one-upmanship thing with each other, because it just looked so fresh. And it's a testament to a great, I think it's the original great kind of 60s into the 70s buddy movie. I think it started that whole genre almost, this one.
Absolutely. But you mentioned the ending, and I have this thing about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is, until Inception in 2010, this was, I think, the most misinterpreted ending of pretty much any movie ever. I now give that credit to Inception, because people don't seem to know how to read that ending, which is blindingly obvious. This one, I think people seem to read it as this great heroic ending, rather than the sort of downbeat one that it actually is. And it's right there on the screen. People seem to just take it in entirely the wrong way.
Well, when I saw it, I was lucky enough to see it in the cinema. I was kind of snuck in, well underage. And when we saw it, and it was in the Rialto Leytonstone, now long demolished, and it was a very muted crowd that left, having had that great journey with them. But even so, if you've never seen it, you're in for a rare old treat. If you have seen it, you'll watch it again. 20-3, tomorrow afternoon, BBC Two. It's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And here's the trailer of its time, but wonderful.
Then, Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific put the top lawmen in the West on their trail.
They're very good.
If he'd just pay me what he's spending to make me stop robbing him, I'd stop robbing him.
They were outlaws, running out of time and out of space, and a changing world was closing in on them. From the American West to New York, to the dangerous new frontier of Bolivia.
Bolivia.
Well, he'll feel a lot better after he's robbed a couple of banks.
He doesn't know. Well, he sort of does. Some very funny lines in that as well. And you've got great kind of side characters who pop up and disappear, some not in a particularly pleasant way. And a great night fight, one of the great fights of all time, when the gigantic guy challenges Butch for leadership of the Wild Bunch and doesn't ask about rules or whether they can have knives. So it's a great film. It laughs all the way. You can tell I'm enthusiastic about it. And my final recommendation is another sort of Western. And I think this is an overlooked kind of element to Clint Eastwood's career. This came out in 1981. Made a bit of money, not a lot of money. Around the time he made a film called Honky Tonk Man, set in the 30s, about a country and western singer. And he likes his country music, there's old, and his jazz, of course, Clint Eastwood. And in Bronco Billy, he plays a man who runs a Wild West circus in our era, in the modern era. And he's like the kind of... I think he thinks he's living in the 1890s, and he's not as sharp on the sharp shooting as he used to be, and he's got a woman who uses kind of to either throw knives at or shoot at. She gets slightly injured by him and leaves the circus, and he recruits Sandra Locke, who is his then partner, and she kind of thinks, is this man what he seems, or is he some kind of either a throwback or somebody with a secret to hide. It's a very sweet film. This funny film as well. I'm probably overplaying it because it's by no means a masterpiece, but I think it's worth a look, folks, if you like Clint Eastwood films and you like something slightly gentler. And it's an interesting film, this, because it shows the way his career, well, it had many strands to his career, but I think it shows a kind of almost Frank Capra side to his personality, where he's actually prepared to be Clint Eastwood pulling the rug out from under himself, if that makes sense. Have you ever seen this one, Ben?
No, about once a year you throw me an absolute curveball. I'm very happy to say we started off early in 2023 with this one, because I have never seen Bronco Billy.
Have you seen Honky Tonk Man?
I have seen Honky Tonk Man.
Well, it's set in the modern era, but it's got that kind of feel to it, which is of something. I mean, Honky Tonk Man's a richer film, I think, but it's an interesting kind of a facet to what Clint Eastwood do, given that he directed it himself as well. I think he sings on it, but you can only hear him in the background. We've got the trailer, though. It's from 1981. It's on 4:15 on Channel 5 on Easter Sunday, and it's worth a look, folks. It's Bronco Billy.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we welcome you this evening to the greatest, the most authentic Wild West show in America. It is my privilege and honor to present to you this evening the greatest six-shooter. The fastest draw!
Stick him up or I'll plug you.
Are you really the fastest guy in the West?
Ain't nobody faster than Bronco Billy.
You think you're faster than I am?
Well, I wouldn't want to find that out, Sheriff.
Why, aren't you Bronco Billy the fastest in the West? I could outdraw you any day in the week. Bronco Billy.
Also stars Scatman Crothers, who's so good in The Shining, of course, a great film. It's a lovely Easter Sunday afternoon film, 4:15 on 5. And what's your final recommendation? You've gone futuristic on us, I think, haven't you, for your final nod?
I mean, it is futuristic, but it has so much more relevance to the present day. And also very decidedly not an Easter Sunday pick, which is kind of why I like it. It's Paul Verhoeven's 1997. I think this was his last sort of big movie for a good long. I mean, he's done other things since, but this was his last sort of big mainstream studio actioner. The guy who gave us RoboCop, who gave us Total Recall, and most importantly, of course, gave us Showgirls.
I knew you
yes,
mentioned
exactly. You have to mention Showgirls, just for the swimming pool scene. But it's Starship Troopers, based on the novel by Robert A. Heinlein, a seminal science fiction tome. And it stars Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, Clancy Brown, Jake Busey, and of course Neil Patrick Harris, NPH himself. And it's the great sci-fi war movie. It's humanity versus the bugs, literal bugs, the arachnids from out in the galaxy who are flinging asteroids at Earth to try and take out humanity. And it's a great parable. It's a look at the use of propaganda versus, in a fascist utopia and just these young kids. And the whole thing basically stems from the idea that he has hired effectively actors who can't really act. They're there to look pretty. And the film kind of plays on this. It knows that they can't act. They're not meant to be, great thespians. They're kind of lantern-jawed idiots. And the movie absolutely has a ball with it. It's a movie I can watch once a week, easily. I love Starship Troopers, and I'm very happy to say I've picked one of my very favourite scenes for you. This is the introduction of the great Michael Ironside. Paul Verhoeven alum, of course, played Richter in Total Recall, got his arms taken off in the lift by Arnie once upon a time. He is their new commander, Radjak. I've got you his intro scene. You can see this on ITV4 on Sunday night at 9 o'clock. It's a quite short, punchy movie. I think this will probably be over by 11 once you factor in adverts, and oh my god, strap in for a wild ride. It was so good, they had to advertise it with the then relatively new song, Song 2 by Blur, which fit so perfectly. So I'm going to leave you with Radjak. So ITV4, Sunday night, 9 o'clock. I'm going to hand it over to the Roughnecks.
This is for you new people. I only have one rule. Everyone fights, no one quits. If you don't do your job, I'll shoot you. You get me?
We get you, sir!
Welcome to the Roughnecks.
Radjak's Roughnecks!
At ease, listen up. Got a new Sky Marshal and a new battle plan. Gonna clean out the system's outlying Klendathu one planet at a time. Before we hit Tango Urilla. After Fleet glasses the planet, MI mops up. Carry on.
Carry on. Okay, carry on, Ben Collins. That's about your off-screen podcast. Great recommendation. That, of course, is it drops, I think, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock this morning, is it, off-screen?
8 o'clock, you can hear Adam Ball and I on podcast platforms, where this week we're talking about a new movie by Guy Ritchie starring Jason Statham. You know, for a change, those two never worked together. And 30 years later, Mario is finally back on cinema screens, and I'm very happy to say he fares a lot better this time around.
Okay, that's a great listen to the off-screen podcast from 8 this morning, and Van joins us each and every Friday with his 3 Freeview film recommendations for the weekend. Van, always a joy, matey. Have a great Easter, and we'll talk again next week on talkSPORT and talkRADIO. We'll be live till 5, you roughnecks.